Hello, welcome back to Beyond the Brink and Fighting Back. I'm your host, Rosemary Armeo, and I'm excited about our guest today because we have a long connection, although we've never met face to face. Her name is Leslie-Jean Thornton, like me, and we've had some overlap. She's a journalist turned professor. She's working now at the Cronkite School of Journalism, Distinguished School at Arizona State University. Her research is fresh and interesting. She is many things besides just a journalist and a professor. Those are pretty big too, but she's a photographer. She is a gardener. All the things I admire and like to do, she also likes and admires and does them better. I should hate her, but I don't. And we're here today. We're here today specifically to talk about an interesting paper you've just published called Duck and Cover. And it's about an old theme. You take a fresh look at it: attacks by the Trump administration on journalists. And you went back, you started way back in 2017 when he was new and an unknown quantity, but he was turning the press even then into enemy of the people. This paper just came out now, Leslie. Why? Is that because you're an extraordinary slow and lazy publisher? What happened?
No, not quite. Although I guess sometimes that can be applied to me. Um, no, it's very interesting. Academic research tends to, well, in most people's eyes, lag behind things because it has to go through a process of peer review and especially with things that are current events, it's not deemed worthy, speaking quite generically, of research until it's been around a while and you can look at other things to attest whether or not it was real. In fact, all the time I was learning to become a research professor, one of the insults against research was it's too journalistic, right?
Right.
Meaning that it was too of the time, too immediate, too descriptive. All of the things that I think are very valuable. So when I decided I was going to write this up as a paper, despite all the knowing that it wasn't 10 years old, it was now, I still was a little bit surprised by the rejection I got from two top journals. The reviewers said, no, you're overreacting. This is a flash in the pan. It's not going to happen. And I just swallowed my bile and went ahead and wrote other papers that showed different analyses. But I've been chipping away at this for a while. And when I was doing the original research for this paper, I found a personal bond to the people who responded. I knew some of them, but they had referred me to other people I didn't know. And when these really honest, personal replies started coming in about how they were feeling, you couldn't help but bond to them. So I felt it was important and I had a duty and I was honor bound to get those stories out there. So I tried, but
Let me give our my listeners some background here.
yeah.
What Leslie did that I find unique is she looked at attacks on the press not as, oh, what it does to the institution, what it might mean for democracy, but the impact it was having on individual journalists trying to report about things Trump was doing. They were the immediate target of those. You're the enemy of the people, you're liars, go after the press. They were the immediate targets, and you talked to them. And for those publishers and reviewers who rejected you, wow, did you ever prove to be the right one? Because it's when I read the paper, I go, this is like old news. This is old stuff. Why is this even out? And of course, you've just explained why that is. So tell us a little bit about your methodology. I want to know what set you off in the direction. What made you say this is not a flash in the pan, it's something to look at? Was it that rally that Trump held in Arizona back in 2017? Was that what tipped you off?
That was the final straw. It was almost a two-stage process. What was it? I think it was a week before, maybe 10 days before, was the rally in Charlottesville, Unite the Right. And Trump
After
came
the
out
killing.
and
Yeah.
did his
Good people on
statement.
both sides. Yeah,
Good people,
remember
both
that.
sides, yes. I was at a national conference in Chicago. It was a journalism conference. It was national, actually international. And I saw on CNN what was happening in Charlottesville. I almost missed my ride to the airport because I was so busy documenting the things that were happening on social media, on news, and other things. And I could see reports coming in from the people who were there, and how compelling it was. And as journalists, of course, we rely on this firsthand information, these observations, because it it's not people rethinking what happened, it's them telling exactly what happened, which should be a very valuable part of our history. Anyway, I got back to Phoenix, and sure enough, there was this rally 2 blocks away from where I lived, where Trump was ginning up the rhetoric, spouting about enemy of the people, getting the crowds quite rowdy. I could hear the crowds, and then my apartment had sliding doors out to the road
Mhm.
that was 0.3 miles from where all this was happening. So I had CNN on. I was watching what was happening down the road. The windows were open because it's Phoenix and it's hot and it's August. So I was getting the fumes of the gases they were using. It wasn't tear gas, but whatever it was coming in, and I could smell it. I could hear the roar of the crowd. I could hear the pops of the flashes going off, and just glued to the computer and the TV, gathering as much information as I could. And something about it, I just snapped. I was worried about students of ours. The journalism school was also a block away. The students of ours who might have been covering it, I worried for their safety. And it was just like, this should not be. This shouldn't be. I've got to document this. And so I started. No hope of publication, particularly, just documenting.
And you
And
spoke to almost 50 journalists about their responses to that rally and others like them that the president held all over the country. And
yeah, I
one,
started with a couple of people I knew had been at them and I knew as
right.
friends. And I said, okay, tell me other people who have been in this situation and have a reason to have a decent informed opinion about this. And I sent them some questions saying, how do you feel about this? How's it affecting you? And they responded very, very quickly. I think one person declined because his organization had asked people not to respond to those because of some pending litigation. It was one of the very big organizations, but there were other people from that newspaper that did respond. So I did get the benefit of them. I forget how many organizations were represented. 56. I'd have not 56. I had 48 people.
Yes.
Must have been 36 that I'm remembering, but it was all sorts of people.
A little bit of history before we go into what you found out. You say in this paper that these political attempts that we're seeing, not just it was not a flash in the pan, we're seeing them increasingly, even today in the second term. Political attempts to delegitimize the legitimate press are largely uncharted. They've not been looked at by journalists before. Do you have any clues as to why the Trump administration has taken this route, why it's doing something that's never been charted or really looked at in the United States before?
It hasn't been looked at currently, and well, I shouldn't say currently, hadn't been looked at currently at the time, but certainly it had been well documented in the Nazi Germany,
Absolutely.
in communist things. Stalin and Lenin were known for using the term enemy of the people. And it's a very clear step in propaganda, in the rise of authoritarianism. It's to cast doubt on the people who would tell you something other than what the authoritarian viewpoint was supposed to.
Want you.
Yeah,
So historically in the United States, there was the Lincoln era where there was censorship and suppression of the press. So
yeah,
what you mean is it's uncharted really in modern times. Modern.
yes,
Hmm.
yeah. And I
Okay.
think there's a lot of it's being covered now. I mean, now we have books
Absolutely.
coming
Yeah.
out and all the rest, but at that time when it was first starting, there was a lot of poo-pooing going on and not taking him seriously. And
I can remember speaking on the radio, and I was not the only one, but I know it personally. And I would make comparisons between the Trump administration and Hitler's early years in office. He had not killed 6 million people in 1939, and
right.
yet some of the patterns were the same. And we got that exact reaction. You're overreacting. This is just rhetoric. He's going to mature into the post. We've not seen that. In fact, attacks on the press have increased. We have New York Times reporters being subpoenaed. And today there is a story, as we are taping, there's a story out that third parties, the mothers of these journalists, also are being subpoenaed. I've never heard of anything like that.
Oh man. No, I had read about the same story with the emails. They were looking at emails of
Correct.
relatives.
Correct.
Yeah,
A
it's
direct intervention. So, do you have any thoughts of redoing or adding on or updating the research that you really began in 2017?
yeah, I do. I'm not quite sure how to do it, or what angle to take, I suppose I should say. It would be interesting perhaps to contact the same people, many of whom are no
Right.
longer in journalism.
Yeah, that's a point too. In
Yeah,
many ways, reading this study again, it's called Duck and Cover, and it is available for my listeners to call up. I'm going to put a link out for them. It's like looking at a historical paper. I had totally forgotten about the T-shirt that went around.
yes.
Romance-free journalists, some assembly required. I can remember being outraged in 2017, but I have not thought about that in years because there's new outrages every day.
Yeah, and it's very interesting how that directly ties it to racism. It's not
Yep.
just anger
Lynching.
at the press, it's a very much deeper anger that's being stirred up. And we see it very clearly now in the racism.
It's so neatly connected, like put together, that it makes me wonder if it's been thought out. I don't think Trump thought it out. I think he's just perhaps maybe just a racist or a nationalist. But I don't know, the Heritage Foundation Project 2025, someone has carefully nuanced these attacks on the press.
I agree. I think it's been going on for quite some time. I mean, I don't want to really pull up Hillary Clinton and her, vast right-wing conspiracy,
She was
but
right. Yeah, yeah. I'm a avowed, and people know this, Hillary supporter, and I think she was right. She wasn't listened to for her own baggage, her own inability to communicate, and hatred against her, sexism against her. But yeah, she was right about a lot of things. So I've delayed the what people may be most interested in. What did you find in your research? How were journalists or were they affected by these attacks by the president? And I ask this knowing that the tradition, the rule in journalism is you don't make yourself part of the story. So, what was the effect? The journalists who are covering politics in general, Trump specifically, were called enemies of the people, go after them, Trump mocked them every occasion. What was the effect? Was there an effect on them? Did they do something differently? Did they behave differently? Did they self-censor? How did the attacks affect journalists?
yeah, I can't attest to the content they wrote because that's just another study or
Right.
10,000 other books, but it had a very deep effect on every single one of the people who responded to me. There were two who said it didn't directly affect them, but that they were worried because they saw the effect on other journalists. And that was twofold. One was a very personal thing. They were scared. They were nervous. They were self-censoring in a way, perhaps even more than they knew they were. So they didn't think they were altering the information, but they were pulling back. They didn't particularly want to go into certain situations or cover certain things. The other was a very personal thing. It was because of the Trumpian attacks, calling them enemies of the people. Other people attacked them. So it was not just a one-way thing. I remember one, this quote didn't get into the paper because there are just so many words I'm allowed to use, but she talked about going home for Thanksgiving, and how the family was just so obnoxious to her that she had to leave because they were calling her an enemy of the people and ragging on her because of that. So there were those kinds of issues. One thing I did quote that was in the paper, or recount anyway, was this one journalist who was at one of the rallies, and someone came up and handed her a piece of paper, and she thought, oh, gee, it's a death threat, because they did get threats. And she opened it up, and it turned out to be a thank you note from someone saying, we really appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for doing that. But the fact that her first reaction was terror and fear, and then surprise that they were appreciated, tells an awful lot about the climate at the time. And this was just the beginning. This was just the start. They were still being told, oh, it'll pass over. Oh, he'll joke. He'll do that. Some news organizations, the New York Times, I know some of the big organizations were already having training and getting in advisors to talk to reporters about how to handle situations, how to protect themselves in such situations. Um, so that was being taken as a real threat.
Mhm.
Um, but you got to wonder, for a long time there's a lot of thinking back about, um, did the press really cover Trump as aggressively as it might have? And might this have been a part of the reason? I would not be surprised at
You
all.
absolutely are right. That is another whole study to be done. I was surprised by one of the respondents that you quote in the paper who said he thought the administration's attacks were justified. Did you get a lot of that?
No, I did
That
not.
was that was a rare one.
That was extreme. I think there was one who said that actually, and I probably
Outlier.
worded it incorrectly. I was trying to show that there was this range between, oh, poo, 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 and oh my God, this is terrible. Um, I when I reread the paper after you mentioned that in the chat, I want to go back and take a look at the original responses. And I was thinking that that might be a very interesting way
Yeah,
to
to go
follow
back.
up, to
Yeah.
go back and look at all the originals again and see if I have a different interpretation of what they
That's
said.
really interesting. One of them, another one of the respondents that who you quote in the paper talked about how he worked for a small paper, as a local community paper. Do you remember this? And he said he had been getting increased numbers of calls from readers objecting or questioning stories that they wrote about local news. Had nothing to do with Washington or Trump, and they had never been questioned before. They were accepted as the local news, the source of information, and suddenly they were being held into question, into scrutiny. And I'd like to blame this on Trump because I'd like to blame Trump for everything, including my eczema. But but the truth is that trust in the press has been declining for a decade. It preceded Trump. He was not the cause or the start of it. Can you distinguish what Trump did about trust in paper? It did his campaign to make people doubt journalists' work, or was it just that's something else involved?
I think it preceded Trump, but what Trump did was give people permission to behave certain ways. And, the whole Trump organization, not Trump just as a person, but he was the most visible. He was the one using profanity and doubting and doing this and accusing and, making it normal to do something like that. But I have thoughts about how we lost the trust of the public, and I think it goes back way far. I personally would start looking in the 1970s. I mean, certainly there were instances before, but I think around the 70s, where family control of larger news organizations and smaller news, the community papers started to diminish or become held by corporate. And so the two strains, there's the public
Right.
service strain of journalism, which I firmly, firmly believe in. And then there's the corporate part of it, of journalism as a way to attract the buck. And around that time, we started watching how we wrote. We wrote at a fourth grade level if we were following the advice,
Mhm.
so everyone could understand. But on the other side of that, we were losing context and we were losing information and we were losing smarts.
Space. We were losing space. They cut down the size of papers. You and I have both been at places where they said,
Yeah,
we're cutting down on news space and on reporters covering it, but you won't lose anything, which is an absolute lie that I remember
absolute.
screaming about at the time. Of course, you're losing context and
Yeah.
information. Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
at the
think,
same time, where they were trying to attract readers,
right.
the redlining, where they were going to sell advertising or distribute papers or
Right.
do that. And so, as we lost the people who didn't have the money to buy the expensive things they wanted to advertise, we lost coverage in those areas. So, we lost a lot of reality.
Yep.
And yeah, I,
I can't tell you the number of times I would set out to report on a story that needed immediate coverage. A murder is usually bad, a crime. And
mhm,
people would say, I'm not talking to you. Where are you when there's good things in this community to cover? And they were
yeah,
right, would not be. So we in the business, the profession, share a lot of the blame for that lack of trust. But
I,
it's like racism. There was racism before Trump. He's just made it okay to be racist these days, to say out loud horrible things and to
I,
act on them, obviously. One of your respondents in the study talked about, I'm not so much worried about the attacks themselves. Trump getting up there bloviating is fine, but the politics that might come out of that kind of attack. And that has proven prophetic, has it not?
Oh, it absolutely has. That's one of the reasons why I think these kinds of journalistic studies, even though they're academic and they're, well researched, they have a journalism flavor to them, are very important because we capture what actually was happening and how journalists were vulnerable to this sort of thing, to this kind of pressure. They didn't write about what was happening to them, to your point earlier about they don't like to be the news. Um, but in fact, that was part of the news. That was a step
Was
in
the news.
propaganda.
I have long hated that policy that we could not be part of the news. I never put it together with what you looked at, but with the use of freedom of information. We are democracy, information. We pay for it as taxpayers. We need to know what the government is doing and why they're doing it. And yet, officials hold back on records and they say it's none of your business. The government is more efficient if people don't know. And I always wanted us to tell readers what we did, the efforts we went through to get information. I was always second guessed by editors who said, no, people don't care about this. They think that this is just your job. They have trouble in their jobs too, and no one cares about them. Why should we tell them? But our job, collecting information, is in their interest. That's not true with any other job. That's the First Amendment does not apply to any other profession but journalists. We have never talked about ourselves. Do you
Mhm.
think readers now are going to care at what you found that journalists are traumatized and troubled and maybe changing their behavior because of Trump? Do they even give that a thought or care about it?
Some might, but they probably would have before. Some of the people who are finding themselves betrayed by their faith in Trump might because they've been hurt, and they're now, I don't want to use the word victims, but they've been taken advantage of. So they might have some sympathy. All I can say is people should be concerned about all of this. We've lost a wealth of journalists and journalism because of takeovers of media by right-wing
Hmm?
interests and the bullying Goliath effect of places like Fox News that employ propagandistic methods, the repetition of false information all the time without really having the ability to point that out to even when we have, who was it, Dale? I've forgotten his name. The guy who checked all the facts all the time during Trump's
Oh,
speeches.
Glenn Kessler, I think that was on at the Washington Post.
Glenn
Yeah.
Kessler, and there were at least two others who were doing the same thing, but we don't have that anymore. And I can understand that because it wasn't really having that much effect, I don't think.
I never understood how fact checking got separated from reporting. When
Good
growing
point.
up, that was reporting. You check out the facts and verify. So making it separate, I think that even did damage to our profession.
It may very well have, yeah. I think there was good, earnest effort to cope on a behalf of a great many people, but I mean, look at the Washington Post takeover.
Whoa.
That's that
And
hurt.
CNN is on the brink now. There's been a
CNN, CBS,
yes,
yeah,
yes, it's gone. Yeah. I should point out your study did not just look at newspaper people. We're newspaper people, but
right.
you looked at all media, correct?
Everything's in there. Yep. I
Yeah,
had somebody
broadcast
from
online.
everything.
We are talking, my listeners, with Leslie-Jean Thornton. She's a journalist, ex-journalist, I guess, and now an academic researcher, a professor at the Cronkite School of Journalism in Arizona. She is an expert in social media and in alternative forms of storytelling. I'm going to ask her about that in a minute because she's got some interesting research unrelated to what we're talking about now on cartoons. But to finish up on this a bit more, um, you think that journalists could make a personal approach to people saying, this is what happened. This is what we did as a result of Trump coming after us, and you're affected by it in the following ways. Would that be an approach that might work in your view?
I do. I do think that would work. Not for everyone, maybe not for the majority of people, but I'm a qualitative person. I don't care about majorities anyway. So I think it could reach the right people.
Yeah.
Um, Something like that. I think there are books to be written and podcasts to be made and, essays to be done.
Yeah,
Lots of
you
things.
cannot retire. There's several more papers in here that
I'm trying to retire. Really, I am.
have you gotten a response since Stuck in Cover finally came out years after you did the original research? Have you gotten a response other than me calling and asking you to be on my podcast?
Other than some people, not really, but I have to throw in the caveat that it was published just before um, my brother entered his final days and he died last week. So I have been not really paying attention, frankly.
It's one more reason I thank you for being on. I got you at a very bad time and personal time in your life. I certainly know about grief. We could go into that too, but I think Anderson Cooper has those grief
Yeah,
podcasts.
he's got that sewn up. Yeah.
But I do want to talk to you about summarizing the news of the week in just cartoons, editorial cartoons, which is another dying art. Tell us about that.
The cartoons, I love visual communication and I love social media. And I am particularly interested in how people communicate what they feel is the news through visual means on social media. So when I started seeing political cartoons being distributed widely on social media, I started really paying attention to them. And my respect has just grown and grown and grown for the intelligence that political cartoonists bring to their subjects and are able to report things that maybe the the journalist who's writing or broadcasting can't say, and they do it by communicating through symbols that have other meanings that resonate to other things. So when you see a cartoon that reminds you of something like um, during Kamala Harris's campaign, there were a lot of cartoons comparing her to Ruby Bridges, the young girl who was by court order told to desegregate a school. And there were lots of paintings and things. Norman Rockwell did a very famous painting of her. So if you see Kamala Harris in that kind of a painting takeoff in a cartoon, they're saying more than, just the top of it. So I've been fascinated by this for quite some time, and I do archive them and share some of them with people on Facebook, for example. I don't want to run afoul of copyright rules, so it's me studying them, not making it a buck. But to bring it back to Trump and the press and things like that and the reporting thereof, it is fascinating how soon I started collecting cartoons in 2016 of what he was doing. And the symbols are remarkably apt. They're the baby, they're the clown, they're the bully, and those have maintained their value as
That's
far
been
as symbols.
consistent throughout all the time you've looked at. Tell us about some of the events you've chronicled. I am thinking particularly of the reflecting pool, not the most horrible of the things Trump has done, but certainly very symbolic of his administration. You had, I think, 2 or 3 weeks of cartoons just on the pool.
I did. Now I'm struggling to remember what they were individually. Isn't that terrible? But the way people make fun of them, again, make fun, put that in air quotes. They're pointing out the driving of monster cars and vehicles over the pool. They're playing on the idea, here's the symbolism of Narcissus, the reflecting pool, of
Right.
how it reflects what Trump is actually doing. And when they show pictures or drawings of Trump looking into the pool, and the pool is this moldy, sodden, horrible, yucky mess, it just goes on and on. It's really, I do want to sit down, and as I said, that came during a time where I was just grabbing rather than analyzing, but I do want to go back and take a look at that and
Oh,
see all the different ways.
I think it's fascinating. I find myself trying to predict what your cartoons for the next week will be about. I'm pretty sure next week is going to be about the World Cup and how he didn't get off the stage and kind of hog the glory of the winning Spanish team.
Yeah, yeah, and then there are going to be many that just poke fun at him, but almost all of the really substantive cartoons that I've seen have an underlying message.
Right.
It's
And
not,
The Iran war comes to mind. There's been
yes.
plenty of comment about that editorially.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, the heat right now, the climate change, the
I know.
great Chinese hoax that, doesn't exist, but
It's all in our heads. Yeah. Do you see a connection? There is a connection, right, between the editorial cartoons, which, like us, comes from the newspaper tradition, and memes, which are now all over the internet. The memes start the minute the headlines come out.
they do. There's a very deep connection. And a lot of those cartoons get used as memes in the sense
Right.
that they go viral and they're
Right.
reposted. So, which is how I first began really paying attention to them, even though I loved political cartoons before. But yeah, there's a very definite change. But now that we have AI, we also have a whole new wave of visuality coming in because anybody can produce something that looks very artistic in a way. And
Catching.
yeah, very much eye-catching and very inflammatory. They know all the right ways to play, to push the buttons. But what's also extraordinarily troubling to me is going back to the bots, the planned I mean, it's been shown that Russia was very definitely manipulating social media, and using memes, using things designed to push buttons was absolutely the way they were going. So, in a way, I see signed political cartoons as having more legitimacy in terms
Hmm.
of representing
Hmm.
both reporting and perspective than I do the just memes or the AI generated things. they have credence as reflecting a perspective, but I don't know where they're coming from. Maybe they're coming from China, maybe they're coming from Russia.
That's what the president thinks, China. Yeah.
Well, in hate to agree, but some of these things are, I'm pretty sure.
North Korea is well known as a social media manipulator. You're quite the student. You know tons about social media and how it's evolved. Talk a little bit about how the Trump administration has utilized social media in ways we've not seen administrations before to put their point of view. Some would call it propaganda.
Oh man, yeah. Well, they've completely bypassed any kind of press office. They no longer archive anything, so they've destroyed our historical records by using Twitter and then Truth Social. He gathered people into a platform that he had control over. Maybe he didn't
We
have
lost
control
you
of
again
Twitter,
for a
but
second. You said when we left you, you were saying they completely eliminated any kind of press office. Continue from there, please.
yeah, completely eliminated the press office pretty much, or the usefulness of it. But they've also removed things from historical archives. So we've lost a record of statements. They don't keep transcripts of phone calls, on and on. But I think the most egregious part of it, or the strategic part of it, is by him first going to Twitter and firing people over Twitter, putting important policy decisions over Twitter, and then having good old Elon take over that. And then he moved to Truth Social. And then that is primarily his. It exists almost entirely to issue propaganda and edicts. And then it gets copied over into social media. It gets reported by news organizations, on and on. So he's controlling a very important means of communication that we have no uh, way to monitor, basically, other than buying a membership or following along or doing something like that. Um, oh, I've gone down a rabbit hole. Tell me, bring me back, Rosemary.
No, no, you're that I've led you into that rabbit hole. I appreciate that. But we have run out of time. I want to thank Leslie-Jean Thornton for being with me today to talk about her research on, wow, it's really on propaganda is what you're researching and how it's communicated in the digital age. That sounds like a course you might be teaching sometime, Leslie.
I want to retire.
No, no, no. We need you. We need these voices. And we end these podcasts traditionally with a toast. And I would like to make mine today to truth, which we seem to have lost sight of. It's gotten muddled with the medium. Social media has made it harder to get truth out, and it's muddled with propaganda and discrimination and our bipolar way of thinking in this country. We're radically different. And so to get at what's really true and matters has become harder and harder. That's hard for me to say as a journalist, but I have to admit it. So to truth.